Two ancient wonders stand as silent rivals across the sands of time. The smooth, eternal pyramids of Egypt face the massive, stepped ziggurats of Mesopotamia. Which civilization truly pushed humanity further? This is the ultimate ancient tech showdown, a head-to-head battle between two cradles of civilization born along mighty rivers. By the end, you will have a definitive answer to one of history's greatest debates. We will unlock the secrets behind their colossal monuments and pit their revolutionary sciences against each other. Was it the land of the pharaohs with its timeless tombs, or the realm of city-states with the world's first written laws? We will compare them across 18 brutal categories, from architecture to warfare, to crown a single champion. So before we tally the final score, which ancient superpower do you instinctively trust more? Our journey begins not with a single stone, but with the blueprint for society itself. To understand which civilization was more advanced, we must first see how they organized the very space where people lived, worked, and dreamed. The world's first true cities rose from the fertile mud of Mesopotamia, places like Uruk and Ur. These were not just large villages, they were dense, buzzing hubs of humanity. Imagine walking through a maze of narrow, winding streets, past tightly packed houses made of mud brick, all leading toward the towering heart of the community, the ziggurat. These cities had distinct districts for craftsmen, for priests, for merchants. They were organic, growing outward from their temple centers in a seemingly chaotic but deeply functional way. This reflected their political reality, a world of competing city-states, each a sovereign power jostling for dominance. The city itself was the kingdom. Now cross the desert to the Nile. Egyptian cities like Thebes or the purpose-built capital of Amarna tell a different story. They feel planned, orderly, almost linear. Picture grand, straight processional avenues designed for royal parades, leading directly to the pharaoh's palace or a major temple complex. Residential areas were often more uniform, laid out in grids or blocks by state architects. This was not the organic sprawl of Mesopotamia, it was a deliberate design. The layout shouted one undeniable truth, a single, all-powerful authority. The pharaoh's will was the law, and the city reflected that top-down control, every street and district serving the divine king and the cosmic order he maintained. So what does this first category reveal? Mesopotamia's urban chaos was the engine of innovation, a crucible where ideas from independent cities could clash and combine. Egypt's majestic order was the tool of stability, ensuring a unified society could marshal its resources toward monumental goals. One prized competitive ingenuity, the other prized harmonious control. And this fundamental difference in how they built their world will echo through every invention, every law, and every battle to come. That fundamental choice between chaotic innovation and divine order becomes set in stone, quite literally, when we look at their most iconic creations. Monumental architecture is the ultimate proof of concept for any ancient civilization. It screams to the heavens, we are here, we are powerful, and we can bend the very earth to our will. So how did these two river giants tackle the challenge of building the impossible? Let's start with Egypt, because the image is seared into our collective mind, the smooth, sloping sides of the Great Pyramid of Giza. To call it big is a cosmic understatement. For over 3,800 years, it was the tallest man-made structure on Earth. It consists of roughly 2.3 million individual stone blocks, each weighing an average of 2.5 tons, with some interior blocks weighing up to 80 tons. The engineering precision is what truly defies belief. The pyramid's base is leveled to within just 2.1 centimeters. Its sides are aligned almost perfectly with the four cardinal points of the compass, with an error margin of just a fraction of a degree. Think about that, moving millions of multi-ton blocks across miles of desert, then assembling them with the accuracy of a master watchmaker, all without modern tools, wheels, or even iron. The logistics alone, feeding and housing an army of workers, organizing quarries and transport, represent a staggering feat of administrative and engineering genius. It was a national project of unimaginable scale, a testament to a society so unified it could focus its entire might on a single, perfect point for generations. Now shift your gaze to the flat plains of Mesopotamia. Their answer to the sky was not a smooth triangle, but a towering mountain, the ziggurat. The great ziggurat of Ur was a colossal stepped pyramid, a solid mass of sun-dried mud bricks at its core, finished with a skin of fired bricks set in bitumen. While stone was rare and precious here, they had an endless supply of mud from the rivers. So they built big, but they built smart. The ziggurat was a logistical puzzle of a different kind, building upwards and outwards with a material that is inherently fragile and heavy. To prevent the entire structure from collapsing under its own weight or melting in the rain, they used clever techniques like building internal drainage channels and layering reeds between courses of brick to add flexibility and strength. It was less about micrometer precision and more about brute force stability, a man-made mountain that served as a physical bridge between the earth and the gods. So here is our first architectural question, which is the more impressive engineering feat. Is it Egypt's obsessive, almost supernatural precision with stone, a material that lasts for eternity? Or is it Mesopotamia's ingenious, massive solution using the only material they had in abundance, creating grandeur from the very mud beneath their feet? But the stone and mud only tell half the story. To truly judge their advancement, we must ask what these colossal piles were actually for. Their purpose reveals the deepest ambitions of each civilization. The Egyptian pyramid was not a public monument, it was a private machine. Its smooth, sealed geometry was a cosmic launchpad for a single soul, the pharaoh. Every angle, every internal passage, every burial chamber was meticulously designed for one sacred function: to propel the god-king from death into eternal life among the stars. The pyramid was a resurrection device, built with the resources of an entire nation to serve the ultimate goal of one man. This speaks volumes about their cultural priorities, a society so focused on the afterlife, on cosmic order, and on the absolute power of a single ruler that it would dedicate generations to perfecting a tomb. It was architecture in service of eternity and deified authority. Now climb the giant stairway of a ziggurat. You are not heading toward a sealed burial chamber, you are ascending toward the heavens themselves. At the summit stood a temple, the literal dwelling place of the city's patron god. Priests would climb daily to perform rituals, to feed the deity, to interpret celestial signs. This was a bridge, a meeting point between the human community and the divine. The ziggurat was for everyone, the spiritual heart of the city-state. Its construction was a communal act of piety, reinforcing the bond between the people and their protector god. This reflects a more distributed, accessible form of religion, where society's relationship with the gods was a continuous public conversation, and this difference in purpose had a direct impact on their very substance. The pyramid, built of stone for eternity, was meant to last forever, untouched and unchanging, just like the pharaoh's journey to the afterlife. The ziggurat, built of mud brick for the present, was constantly under siege by the elements. Rain, wind, and time would erode it, requiring each generation to rebuild, to restore, to maintain that sacred connection. One civilization built for an unchanging eternity, the other for a cyclical, renewable present. So, is advancement merely about what lasts the longest, or is it about what a society values enough to rebuild again and again? This category forces us to see that engineering genius is always in service of a culture's deepest beliefs. The ambition to build for gods and kings required a tool even more revolutionary than the lever or the ramp, a way to make thought permanent. Both civilizations answered this call, but their solutions were as different as stone is from mud. In the bustling markets and temple storerooms of Mesopotamia, a pressing need gave birth to writing. The first marks were not poetry, they were receipts. Picture a temple administrator trying to track incoming sheep, jars of oil, or measures of grain. Simple pictures scratched into clay worked for a while, but as trade and society grew more complex, so did the system. Those pictures began to simplify, becoming more abstract. The real breakthrough came when scribes started using a wedge-shaped reed stylus to press into soft clay, creating the distinctive marks we call cuneiform, which means wedge-shaped. This tool changed everything. The curves of a drawn ox head became a series of sharp, angular wedges. Over centuries, this system evolved from representing objects to representing sounds, allowing scribes to write names, complex ideas, and eventually entire languages. It was a flexible, powerful, and remarkably durable system, for once the clay tablet was baked in the sun or a kiln, it became virtually indestructible, a time capsule fired into the future. Meanwhile, along the Nile, writing was born under a different sun. Egyptian hieroglyphs emerged not from ledgers, but from a desire to connect the human world with the divine. The word itself means sacred carvings. From the very beginning, these were stunning works of art, meticulously carved into temple walls and tomb chambers. A hieroglyphic text was a visual symphony combining logograms that represented whole words or concepts, signs for consonant sounds, and determinatives that clarified a word's meaning. They could be read left to right to left, or top to bottom, with the direction of the animal and human figures telling you which way to go. While cuneiform was pressed into humble clay, hieroglyphs were often reserved for eternal stone. But the Egyptians also developed a more practical cousin, hieratic, a cursive script written with a brush and ink on a far more versatile medium, papyrus. This reed paper was lightweight, portable, and relatively cheap to produce, allowing for longer texts, administrative documents, and literature to flow along the Nile. So in this first glance at their written word, we see a stark contrast in philosophy. Mesopotamia gave us a pragmatic, durable system born of commerce and bureaucracy, etched into the very earth. Egypt gave us a sacred, artistic system that was also a functional masterpiece, capable of gracing a tomb wall for eternity or recording a tax roll on a scroll. Both were monumental leaps of the human mind, but they asked a different question of their creators: was writing a tool for the market or a bridge to the gods? But a script is only as powerful as the hands that hold it. Who was allowed to write, and what they wrote reveals the true soul of a civilization. In the crowded city-states of Mesopotamia, cuneiform was a tool of the people, or at least of a surprisingly wide slice of society. Yes, learning it was a grueling ordeal, mastered in strict scribble schools where students spent years memorizing hundreds of signs. But this education created a powerful professional class. Scribes were everywhere. You would find them in the temple recording offerings. You would find them in the palace drafting royal decrees and diplomatic letters to distant kings. Crucially, you would find them in the bustling harbor or the market square, drawing up contracts for a shipment of copper, a loan of silver, or the sale of a house and a date palm orchard. Writing was the engine of commerce and law. This practical foundation gave birth to something magnificent: literature. From this same system of account-keeping emerged the Epic of Gilgamesh, humanity's first great literary masterpiece, a story of friendship, loss, and the quest for immortality that still resonates today. The same wedge that recorded a debt could capture the profound grief of a hero mourning his friend. This is the ultimate testament to the system's reach. It served the accountant, the lawyer, the priest, and the poet. Now turn to the banks of the Nile. Here, the story splits in two. The beautiful, formal hieroglyphs carved in stone were almost exclusively the domain of the state and the gods. They adorned temple walls, royal tombs, and victory stelae, proclaiming the pharaoh's divine power and eternal deeds for all to see, but not for all to read. This was sacred signage controlled by the elite. For the day-to-day business of running a kingdom, the Egyptians developed hieratic, a flowing, cursive script written with brush and ink on papyrus. This was the workhorse of the bureaucracy, used by scribes to take a census, calculate taxes, or manage the vast agricultural estates. But here is the key difference. While Mesopotamian merchants might personally use or commission a cuneiform contract, in Egypt, this administrative writing was still a tool of the state, managed by a scribble class that served the pharaoh's centralized machine. The average farmer or artisan would no more write a hieratic letter than they would commission a pyramid. The power of the written word was funneled through and fiercely guarded by the institutions of crown and temple. So, when we ask which writing system had a broader impact, the evidence leans toward Mesopotamia. Their cuneiform created a literate sphere that extended into economic and personal life, fostering a culture of record-keeping, legal argument, and even personal correspondence that empowered a wider segment of society. Egypt's system, for all its breathtaking beauty and efficiency, was ultimately a pillar of state control and religious orthodoxy, designed more to immortalize authority than to facilitate everyday exchange. One script helped build a complex, interconnected society, the other helped solidify an eternal, divine order. The power of a written word or a law depends entirely on the numbers behind it. To build a pyramid or manage a harvest, to chart the stars or divide an inheritance, both civilizations needed to master the abstract language of the universe, mathematics. And here, their approaches diverged as sharply as the courses of their rivers. Egypt's mathematics was a masterpiece of practical genius. It was born from the annual gift and curse of the Nile. Each summer, the river would flood, wiping away the boundary markers between fields. When the waters receded, the state surveyors, known as rope stretchers, would arrive. Using knotted ropes to measure right angles and distances, they would precisely redraw every farm plot, ensuring taxes were fair and ownership was clear. This need for measurement and calculation infused their entire system. They used a base 10 system, much like ours, counting in tens, hundreds, and thousands. Their most famous mathematical triumph is etched into the very sides of the pyramids, a concept called the sect. The sect was not an angle in degrees, but a practical ratio, the horizontal distance a pyramid face moved in for every 1 unit of vertical rise. It was a builder's rule, a simple, repeatable formula that allowed an architect to tell a work crew exactly how to set each layer of stone to achieve that perfect, smooth slope. Their engineering extended to water as well. To lift life-giving Nile water to higher fields beyond the floodplain, they perfected the shadoof, a simple but brilliant counterweight lever that a single farmer could operate, and they carved vast networks of irrigation canals directing water with organized precision. Egyptian math was about solving tangible, physical problems, about restoring order to the land and achieving perfection in stone. It was mathematics in service of the state and the cosmos. Now travel to the mud brick study halls of Mesopotamia. Here, mathematics took a flight into abstraction that would shape the modern world. Their system was base 60, a sexagesimal system. Why 60? It is a wonderfully divisible number, easily split by 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 30. This was not just for counting sheep, it was for navigating the heavens. From this system, we inherited the 60-minute hour, the 60-second minute, and the 360-degree circle. Their scribes did not just calculate areas for fields, they developed the earliest forms of algebra. They could solve complex quadratic equations, finding unknown lengths and widths. Surviving clay tablets show word problems about dividing inheritances, calculating compound interest on loans, and even working out how much earth needed to be moved to dig a canal of specific dimensions. Most astonishingly, they applied this math to the stars. They meticulously recorded the movements of planets, identified repeating cycles, and could predict lunar eclipses with remarkable accuracy. Their math was a tool for modeling the universe itself, for creating calendars, for divining the will of the gods, and for building a framework of predictable celestial law. So, in this battle of the brains, who wins? Egypt's mathematics was an engineering powerhouse, breathtaking in its applied, monumental success. It turned ideas into timeless stone. But Mesopotamia's mathematics ventured into a realm of pure theory, creating abstract systems for solving classes of problems, not just one problem. They built the intellectual scaffolding for future science. One civilization used math to perfect the physical world, the other used it to begin deciphering the hidden rules of all worlds. Mapping the heavens was a matter of survival for both civilizations, but they looked up with different eyes. The Egyptians saw a divine clockwork, a reliable mechanism that governed the rhythms of life on Earth. Their greatest astronomical achievement was not a complex theory of planetary motion, but a calendar of stunning practical elegance. They observed that the annual flooding of the Nile, the event that rejuvenated their entire kingdom, coincided almost perfectly with the heliacal rising of the star Sirius. This is the moment when Sirius, after being hidden by the sun's glare, first becomes visible again just before dawn. They noticed this celestial event happened once every 365 days. So they built their civil calendar around it, creating a year of 12 months, each 30 days long, with 5 extra festival days added at the end. This 365-day solar calendar was a monumental leap in timekeeping, far more accurate than lunar calendars for predicting the seasonal agricultural cycle. It was astronomy in direct service to the soil, a tool to anticipate the life-giving flood. Their stargazing extended into the tomb as well, where they painted elaborate star clocks and decan tables on coffin lids, charts to help the deceased navigate the night sky in the afterlife. For them, the cosmos was a predictable, orderly extension of the pharaoh's divine rule. The Mesopotamian gaze, however, pierced deeper into the celestial mystery. They were not just marking time, they were decoding a divine language. From the flat, open plains, they had an unobstructed view of the heavens, and their scribes became relentless data collectors. Night after night, for centuries, they recorded the precise movements of planets, the moon, and the stars on countless clay tablets. They identified constellations, mapped the paths of the celestial bodies, and discovered repeating cycles. Their most feared and respected skill was predicting eclipses. By tracking the patterns, they could foretell when the moon would darken, an event they saw as an ominous message from the gods. This systematic, obsessive recording led to profound discoveries. They divided the sky into a path the sun and planets traveled, a band they eventually segmented into the 12 signs of the zodiac. Their work was a fusion of science and divination, astrology and astronomy, all driven by a belief that the gods wrote their intentions in the stars. This data-driven approach created a legacy of mathematical astronomy that would later fuel Greek and Islamic science. So, which vision of the cosmos represents greater advancement? Egypt's calendar was a work of genius that fed a nation, a perfectly tuned instrument linking star, river, and harvest. It was advanced in its flawless utility. Mesopotamia's astronomy, however, built a framework for understanding the mechanics of the universe itself. It was advanced in its relentless curiosity and systematic inquiry. One civilization used the sky to build a better world on Earth. The other studied the sky to comprehend the very architecture of existence. The stars may have charted destiny, but it was within the fragile human body that the battle for knowledge became most urgent. When sickness struck, did a civilization look to the heavens for a cure, or did it dare to examine the flesh itself? Our next category pits faith against observation in the ancient world's most personal arena, medicine and healthcare. The Egyptian approach to healing was startlingly methodical. For centuries, the process of mummification granted priests an intimate, hands-on knowledge of human anatomy. They learn the positions of organs, the structure of bones, and the pathways of major blood vessels, not from abstract theory, but from direct, repeated practice. This empirical foundation fueled a medical system documented in extraordinary texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a surgical treatise that reads like a modern field manual. It describes 48 cases of injuries from head wounds to spinal fractures, each analyzed with cool, clinical logic. The text instructs the physician to examine the patient, to probe the wound, and then delivers a stark, three-part diagnosis. This injury I will treat, this injury I will contend with, or this injury I cannot treat. It details practical procedures such as stitching lacerations with a needle and thread, setting broken bones with splints made of wood and linen, and even using raw meat as a temporary bandage to stop bleeding. Beyond surgery, Egyptian doctors compiled extensive lists of remedies, a pharmacopoeia drawn from the natural world. They prescribed honey for its antiseptic properties, willow bark for pain relief, and garlic for its potential antibiotic effects, combining these with minerals and animal products in precise formulas. While magic and incantation certainly played a role in their holistic view, the core of Egyptian medicine was a rational system of observation, diagnosis, and treatment. Now cross into a Mesopotamian healer's chamber. Here, the primary diagnosis was often spiritual. Illness was frequently seen as a divine punishment, the work of a demon, or the consequence of a moral failing. The primary healer was the Ashapu, a priest exorcist whose first task was to determine which god or spirit had been offended. Treatment centered on ritual. A patient might be subjected to incantations, prayers, and elaborate ceremonies designed to drive out the invading demon or appease the angry deity. Clay amulets inscribed with protective spells were common prescriptions. Yet to dismiss this as mere superstition would be a mistake. Alongside the Ashapu worked the Asu, a more practical physician. This practitioner did employ tangible remedies, applying bandages, preparing salves from herbs and oils, and using beer as an antiseptic wash. They had a working knowledge of symptoms and some effective treatments, but the framework was fundamentally different. The root cause of disease was supernatural, and thus the primary cure had to be supernatural as well. The practical remedies were often secondary, addressing the symptoms while the rituals addressed the perceived cause. So, in this vital category, Egypt presents a stronger case for a proto-scientific mindset. Their medicine was built on a foundation of physical evidence and systematic trial, a blend of the empirical and the spiritual where observation often led the way. Mesopotamia's approach, while complex and deeply integrated into their worldview, ultimately subordinated the physical body to the whims of the divine. One civilization began to see the body as a system that could be studied and repaired. The other saw it as a vessel for celestial forces beyond mortal control. That practical approach to the body stands in stark contrast to how these societies approached justice for the living. When conflict arose, when a theft occurred or a contract was broken, where did a common person turn? The answer reveals a revolutionary idea, one that fundamentally reshaped human society. In the bustling, competitive world of Mesopotamia, justice needed to be visible, predictable, and etched in stone for all to see. Enter Hammurabi, king of Babylon. Around 1750 BC, he commissioned a monument that would become a cornerstone of civilization, a towering black stone pillar inscribed with 282 laws. This was Hammurabi's code. At the top, a carved scene shows the king receiving the symbols of justice from the sun god Shamash, a divine endorsement for the rules below. The laws themselves are breathtaking in their scope and specificity. They cover everything from the price of hiring a boat to the penalties for shoddy construction. If a builder's house collapses and kills the owner, that builder shall be put to death. If a son strikes his father, they shall cut off his hand. And yes, the principle of lex talionis, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth, is laid out with brutal clarity for cases of personal injury among social equals. But this was not mere brutality. The code introduced revolutionary concepts like the presumption of innocence. A man accused of a crime had the right to bring witnesses and evidence to prove his case. It established fixed rates and responsibilities, creating a stable framework for commerce. The stated purpose was noble: to cause justice to prevail in the land, to destroy the wicked and the evil, that the strong might not oppress the weak. It was a public standard, a contract between the state and its people, declaring that the law was knowable and applied to everyone, at least in theory. Now sail up the Nile to Egypt. Here you will search in vain for a great public stele listing laws for all to read. Egyptian justice flowed from a different source: the concept of mat. This was not a list of rules, but the very principle of cosmic order, truth, and harmony that held the universe together. The pharaoh was the living embodiment of mat, and his primary duty was to maintain it. Therefore, justice was administered personally by the pharaoh and his network of officials, the viziers and local magistrates. They made rulings based on a blend of royal decrees, ancient custom, and their own interpretation of what would restore balance and mat in a given situation. Disputes were often handled locally by village elders or temple officials. There were certainly rules and severe punishments, but they were not codified into a single public document. Justice was more fluid, more personal, and ultimately more mysterious, emanating from the divine wisdom of the king rather than from an impersonal text. So, in this first clash of legal philosophies, Mesopotamia presents a staggering innovation: the idea that law should be written, published, and applied consistently. It was an attempt to create a system over a personality. Egypt's system was the personality, trusting the divine ruler and his agents to channel cosmic order directly into every judgment. One offered the clarity of a written contract, the other offered the wisdom of a living God. But which system better protected its people? The choice between a written code and a living God's wisdom was shaped by the very bedrock of their political worlds. How a civilization organizes power dictates everything it can achieve, from the laws it writes to the monuments it builds. Egypt's political structure was a masterpiece of singular focus. Very early in its history, around 3100 BC, the Nile Valley was forged into a single, unified kingdom under a pharaoh. This was not just a king, he was a living god, the son of Ra, the earthly embodiment of the cosmic order, Mat. His word was divine law. To manage this vast, river-long realm, he built history's first great centralized bureaucracy. At the top sat the vizier, the pharaoh's chief minister, who oversaw everything from tax collection to justice to public works. The kingdom was then divided into administrative districts called nomes, each governed by a nomarch appointed by the crown. These regional governors were the critical link, responsible for implementing the pharaoh's decrees, organizing local labor, and funneling the agricultural wealth of their province back to the capital. This system created astonishing stability. For centuries at a time, under powerful dynasties, Egypt enjoyed a continuity of government that allowed for planning on a generational scale. The Great Pyramid was not an anomaly, it was the ultimate product of this system, a project that required the coordinated labor and resources of the entire nation for decades, all directed by a single, unchallenged will. This was the power of unity, a civilization that could marshal its entire strength toward a single, eternal goal. Now look across the sands to Mesopotamia. Here, the political landscape was a turbulent chessboard. For most of its history, there was no Egypt, no single, eternal kingdom. Instead, the fertile land between the rivers was dotted with powerful, independent city-states like Lagash, Uruk, and later Babylon. Each city was a sovereign nation in miniature, with its own king, its own patron god, its own army, and its own walls. They traded, they formed alliances, and constantly they went to war with each other over land, water rights, and prestige. This was a world of fierce competition and shifting fortunes. A powerful ruler like Sargon of Akkad might temporarily conquer and unite many cities into an empire, but these empires were often short-lived, fragmenting after the death of a strong leader. This constant rivalry created a crucible of innovation. City-states had to be administratively agile to manage resources during war and peace. They had to develop clear laws like Hammurabi's Code to maintain order within their walls and foster trust with merchants. They had to innovate militarily and diplomatically to survive. This political dynamism meant that power, ideas, and technological advances were constantly being tested, adopted, and improved upon in a fierce Darwinian contest between rival centers of power. So, we face a fundamental trade-off. Egypt's god-king and centralized bureaucracy provided the stability for breathtaking, long-term monuments. It was a slow, deep river of power flowing in one unwavering direction. Mesopotamia's competing city-states provided the dynamism for rapid legal, commercial, and administrative innovation. It was a delta of rival streams, each cutting new channels in the search for advantage. One civilization chose the enduring power of the mountain, the other embraced the creative chaos of the marketplace. That political chaos of Mesopotamia forged a crucible for one of humanity's most brutal arts. In a world of constantly warring city-states, military innovation was not a luxury, it was a matter of survival. This relentless pressure turned the land between the rivers into a laboratory for warfare. Their earliest depictions, like the stele of the vultures from the city of Lagash, show soldiers advancing in tight, shoulder-to-shoulder formations, their large rectangular shields creating a wall of protection, a precursor to the later Greek phalanx. This was disciplined, organized infantry, but their true genius emerged when they had to break into the very thing that defined their rivals, the walled city. Mesopotamian armies became masters of the siege. They developed the world's first dedicated siege engines, massive wooden towers on wheels that could be rolled up to a city's walls, allowing archers to fire down on defenders. Most famously, they perfected the battering ram, a heavy, metal-tipped beam suspended from a mobile frame, swung relentlessly against gates and weak points in the masonry. The later Assyrian Empire took this to a terrifying extreme, fielding a professional, standing army organized into specialized units, sappers, archers, charioteers, and heavy infantry, all coordinated with ruthless efficiency to conquer and hold an empire. Their warfare was engineered for conquest and control. Now consider the military machine of Egypt. For centuries, the Nile's natural borders, deserts to the east and west and cataracts to the south, provided incredible security. Their early military was more about projection of power and internal control than constant existential war. Their transformative moment came when they were invaded around 1650 BC by the Hyksos, a people from the northeast who brought with them two revolutionary technologies, the composite bow and the horse-drawn chariot. The Egyptians, brilliant adapters, did not just drive the Hyksos out, they adopted and perfected these weapons. The composite bow, made from layers of wood, horn, and sinew, was far more powerful and compact than the simple wooden bow, allowing an archer in a speeding chariot to unleash devastating volleys. The Egyptian chariot became a lightweight, agile firing platform, a key component of their imperial armies during the New Kingdom. Their warfare was also fluvial, dominated by a powerful navy that patrolled and projected power along the Nile, acting as a fast-moving supply line and troop transport. While they built formidable fortresses at key border points like Buhan in Nubia, large-scale siege warfare against massive walled cities was less common in their experience. So, who wins this ancient arms race? Both were devastatingly advanced in their own theaters. Egypt's combined arms approach of chariots, composite bows, and naval power was perfect for rapid campaigns across the Near East. But for the grim, grinding work of reducing fortified cities and building a lasting empire through sheer military administration, Mesopotamia's specialized siege technology and the Assyrian model of a professional army set a brutal standard that would echo for millennia. One civilization mastered the blitzkrieg, the other invented total war. The clash of armies fades, leaving behind a quieter but equally revealing battlefield, the world of art. Here, the deepest values of a civilization are not enforced by law or spear, but expressed through form and symbol. Egyptian art is an exercise in eternal calm. Step into a tomb or stand before a statue of a pharaoh. You are met with a serene, unblinking gaze. The body is rigid, symmetrical, 1 foot forward in a timeless stride. The shoulders are square to the viewer, but the head is in perfect profile. This is the canon of frontalism, a strict set of rules followed for millennia. Size was not about perspective, but importance. The pharaoh is always the largest figure, with nobles and officials smaller, and servants smallest of all. This is hierarchical scale. The goal was not to capture a fleeting moment or an individual's personality, but to construct an ideal, unchanging reality. Every statue, every painted figure was a magical vessel, designed to house a spirit for eternity or to proclaim a divine truth that never aged. Art was a functional component of religion and statecraft, a machine for the afterlife built from perfect, orderly lines. Its beauty lies in its sublime stillness, a declaration that in the realm of the gods nothing ever changes. Now hold a Mesopotamian cylinder seal in your hand, a tiny cylinder of carved stone. Roll it across soft clay and it leaves a continuous, intricate frieze. Here the scene is packed with action, a ritual, a battle, a mythological hero grappling with beasts. This love of story carries onto the massive stone reliefs that lined Assyrian palaces. Witness the royal lion hunt. The king stands in his chariot, his muscular arm drawing a bowstring taut. Around him, chaos unfolds, lions leap and snarl, wounded beasts tumble from chariots, attendants drive spears home. The detail is breathtaking, every muscle strained, every mane meticulously carved. This art is a narrative, a record of the king's power, piety, and courage. It is meant to overwhelm the viewer with a sense of dynamic event, of history happening. Where Egyptian art freezes a divine moment for all time, Mesopotamian art captures the thrilling, often brutal, sweep of time itself. One civilization used art to escape history, crafting a perfect, static eternity. The other used art to conquer history, stamping the deeds of kings onto the very walls of their palaces. One sought to represent the unchanging ideal, the other sought to dramatize the powerful now. The serene faces of Egyptian statues and the chaotic scenes of Mesopotamian battles were shaped by a force more powerful than any king, their vision of the universe itself. To understand which civilization was more advanced, we must step beyond their temples and into their cosmos, to see the very rules they believed governed existence. For the Egyptians, the universe was a place of profound, beautiful order. At its heart was the concept of Mat, the principle of truth, balance, and harmony that held back the ever-present chaos, personified by the monstrous serpent Apep. Life was part of a grand, optimistic cycle, mirroring the daily journey of the sun god Ra, who sailed across the sky, died each evening in the west, and was reborn each dawn in the east. Death was not an end, but a transition to an afterlife that could be a comfortable, even idealized, continuation of earthly life in the field of reeds. Achieving this was not a matter of blind faith, but of correct action. Through proper ritual, moral living, and the magic of spells from texts like the Book of the Dead, a person could be judged worthy, their heart weighed against the feather of Mat, and granted eternal life. Their gods reflected this interconnected, natural world, often appearing as hybrid creatures: Sobek, the crocodile-headed god of the Nile; Anubis, the jackal-headed guardian of the dead; Horus, the falcon god of the sky. Divinity was woven into the fabric of the river, the animals, and the cycles of the sun. Now, look up from the flat, fertile plains of Mesopotamia. Their cosmology was a more daunting, uncertain place. They envisioned a flat earth floating on a vast, encircling sea, all capped by a solid dome of heaven through which the stars were fixed. The gods, like Anu the sky god or Enlil the storm god, were not comforting protectors tied to nature's cycles. They were immensely powerful, utterly anthropomorphic beings, prone to human emotions like anger, jealousy, and caprice. Humanity was created not as a beloved child of the gods, but as a labor-saving device to toil so the gods could rest. The afterlife was not a reward, but a grim, shadowy underworld known as Urkala, a dusty, dark place where the dead existed as mere whispers, regardless of how they had lived. There was no judgment, no paradise, only a dull, eternal diminishment. This fundamental pessimism created a different relationship with the divine. Life was precarious, held at the whim of powerful, unpredictable forces. The purpose of religion was not to secure a glorious afterlife, but to appease the gods in the here and now, to plead for protection from floods, plagues, and invading armies through constant ritual and divination. This stark difference in outlook echoes through every category we have explored. Egypt's belief in a cyclical, orderly cosmos and a reachable afterlife directly fueled their monumental tomb architecture and their meticulous preservation of the body. It justified the pharaoh's absolute power as the guarantor of Ma'at. Mesopotamia's view of capricious gods and a bleak afterlife focused their architectural energy on temples for the living, the ziggurats where priests could commune with the deities who controlled their fragile present. It fueled their relentless astronomical observations, an attempt to read the intentions of the unpredictable gods in the stars. In literature, the Egyptian tale of the shipwrecked sailor ends with the protagonist safe and rewarded by a benevolent island god. The Mesopotamian epic of Gilgamesh concludes with the hero failing to gain immortality, learning instead to accept the mortal limits set by the gods. So, whose theological thought was more advanced, Egypt constructed an incredibly sophisticated, coherent, and optimistic system that integrated the individual, the state, and the cosmos into a seamless whole. Mesopotamia grappled with a more complex, psychologically realistic, and ultimately more anxious view of humanity's place in a universe governed by forces beyond reason or appeal. One built a theology of hope and order, the other a theology of inquiry and existential negotiation. This cosmic pessimism forged a civilization of relentless pragmatists, masters of a different kind of survival commerce. Stuck on a fertile plain with almost no stone, timber, or metals, Mesopotamia's city-states had a simple choice: trade or perish. So they built the world's first great economic engine. From the docks of ships laden with barley, wool, and textiles sailed down the Persian Gulf, returning with copper from Oman and precious stones from the Indus Valley. Overland caravans wound their way to Anatolia, bartering for silver and tin, the vital ingredients for bronze. This was not casual exchange, it was a highly organized, long-distance network that required incredible innovation. To facilitate deals between strangers who spoke different languages, they pioneered concepts we take for granted today. They created standardized weights, often in the shape of ducks or lions, so a merchant in Babylon and a miner in Anatolia could agree on what a shekel of silver meant. They developed complex contracts etched in cuneiform on clay that detailed loans with interest, partnerships for risky voyages, and even futures agreements for next season's harvest. Temples and wealthy families acted as early banks, extending credit. This was a true market economy where prices could fluctuate based on supply and demand, and profit was a powerful motivator. The bustling, noisy market square was the heart of the city, a place where fortunes were made and the fate of empires could be swayed by the price of tin. Now sail up the Nile. Egypt presents a stunning contrast in economic philosophy. The Nile Valley was a paradise of self-sufficiency. Its rich black soil yielded abundant grain, its marshes provided papyrus and birds, its deserts offered gold and some stone. The pharaoh, as the embodiment of the state and the gods, owned everything in theory. The economy functioned largely on a system of redistribution. Peasants worked land controlled by the state or temples. their harvest was collected into granaries and then redistributed as rations to soldiers, scribes, and laborers working on state projects like pyramids and temples. It was a giant, closed-loop household economy run by the ultimate landlord. Long-distance trade did exist, but it was often a state monopoly, more akin to a royal procurement mission than open commerce. The most famous expedition was to the fabled land of Punt, likely in modern-day Eritrea or Somalia. Pharaoh Hatshepsut sent a fleet not to haggle in a market, but to bring back living frankincense trees, ivory, gold, and exotic animals for the god Ammon and the glory of the throne. These were luxury goods for ritual and display, not commodities for a public market, so whose system was more sophisticated. Egypt's redistributive economy was brilliantly efficient for marshalling a nation's labor toward monumental goals, ensuring social stability through direct control. But Mesopotamia's web of credit, contracts, and international markets required a more abstract and flexible intelligence. It demanded trust in systems over individuals, mathematics over might, and created a vibrant, interconnected world where ideas flowed as freely as goods. One civilization perfected the art of central command, the other invented the engine of global exchange. The bustling markets and royal granaries were built on the backs of millions whose names history often forgets. To truly measure advancement, we must step down from the ziggurats and pyramids and walk the streets where ordinary people lived. In Mesopotamia, society was a steep pyramid of baked clay. At the very top stood the king, the intermediary between the city and its patron god. Just below him were the high priests and priestesses who managed the temple estates, the economic engines of the early city-states. Then came the nobility, high officials, and military commanders. A crucial and dynamic layer was the class of merchants and artisans, the tanners, metalworkers, weavers, and scribes who fueled commerce and craft. Beneath them labored the free peasants, the majority who worked the communal lands, and at the base were the slaves, often prisoners of war or people sold into servitude to pay debts. Yet within this rigid structure, there were surprising pockets of agency, especially for women. In certain periods and city-states, a woman could own property, operate her own business, and even appear as a principal in legal contracts. She could not hold high political office, but she could be a priestess, a tavern keeper, or a merchant of textiles. The law provided her some protections, though always less than a man. It was a hard, hierarchical world, but one with defined rungs and for some a narrow ladder. Life along the Nile followed a different but no less structured rhythm. Egyptian society was also a pyramid, but one smoothed by the omnipresent ideology of Maat, where every person had a role in maintaining cosmic harmony. At the apex was the pharaoh, a living god. Directly beneath him was the vast bureaucracy of viziers, priests, nobles, and scribes, the literate class that kept the kingdom running. Then came the skilled artisans, the painters, sculptors, and carpenters who lived in dedicated villages like Deir el-Medina, building the royal tombs. The broad foundation was the Hemu, the millions of peasant farmers whose lives were dictated by the Nile itself. Their year split into 3 seasons: the inundation, the growing period, and the harvest. When the floodwaters covered their fields, they might be conscripted for state labor on a pharaoh's project, a duty seen as participating in a national, sacred effort. Slavery existed, but it was less a massive economic institution than in Mesopotamia, with many laborers being conscripts or prisoners rather than chattel. Women in Egypt enjoyed significant legal rights compared to much of the ancient world. They could own, inherit, and manage property, initiate divorce, and were entitled to a share of the marital assets. They were depicted alongside their husbands in tomb art as partners, though their primary social role remained within the domestic sphere. The texture of daily life emerged from the materials at hand. A Mesopotamian house was a boxy, inward-looking structure of mud brick, its thick walls defending against the searing heat. Families lived, cooked, and slept in rooms arranged around a central courtyard. Their diet was built on the staples of barley and wheat, consumed as bread and beer, supplemented by dates, onions, lentils, and occasionally fish or mutton. They wore simple woolen tunics. In Egypt, the rhythm was set by the river. A peasant's house was also made of mud brick, but often with a roof of palm logs and matting designed for ventilation. Their diet was blessed by the Nile's abundance, bread and beer again, but also fish, poultry, legumes, and fruits like figs and melons. Linen, woven from flax, was the near-universal fabric, cool and clean in the hot climate. In both worlds, the vast majority of human experience was defined by toil, family, and the hope for a good harvest. One society offered a sliver of economic mobility in its competitive urban centers. The other offered a sense of embedded purpose within an eternal, stable order. The true test of a civilization's advancement may lie not only in what it built for the gods, but in what kind of life it made possible for the child, the farmer, and the craftswoman. The river was not just a source of life, it was the first and fastest road ever built. For civilizations born on the water's edge, mastering transportation was the key to unity, trade, and power. And here, Egypt's advantage was as clear as the Nile's current. They were the undisputed masters of riverine engineering. The Nile provided a perfect, predictable highway flowing north, while the prevailing winds blew south, allowing a skilled crew to sail upstream and float downstream with effortless efficiency. They exploited this gift to its absolute limit. Their wooden ships were sophisticated masterpieces, from the simple reed skiffs of fishermen to the colossal cargo barges that moved 2-ton granite blocks from distant quarries to the pyramid sites. These barges, built from imported cedar planks lashed together with rope, were feats of buoyancy and strength. Imagine a fleet of them, loaded with stone, moving in a stately procession along the river, a floating conveyor belt of ambition that made the impossible monuments possible. Their military used the river as a strategic corridor, moving troops and supplies with a speed land armies could never match. And when they looked beyond their borders, Egyptian shipwrights built sturdy seagoing vessels capable of braving the Mediterranean to trade for cedar from Byblos in the Levant, turning the sea into an extension of their riverine empire. Their world was built on water. Mesopotamia faced a trickier challenge. The Tigris and Euphrates were vital, but they were less predictable, prone to sudden floods and shifting courses. They still used them, of course, building broad, shallow draft barges to carry grain, wool, and pottery between cities, but they could not rely on their rivers with the same absolute confidence. So they innovated in the other direction, on land. Their great breakthrough came from combining trade and necessity. Through their far-flung commerce, they gained access to a precious resource, timber from the forests of the Levant and Anatolia. With this wood, they engineered a revolution, the wheel. Archaeological evidence suggests they were using solid wooden wheels on carts and wagons as early as 3500 BC for both farm work and transport. This was a monumental leap. A single ox cart could carry loads that would require a dozen human porters, transforming agriculture and logistics. This innovation reached its terrifying apex with the invention of the war chariot, a lightweight, horse-drawn platform that became the ultimate mobile weapon of the ancient world. While Egypt later adopted and perfected the chariot, the core technology of wheeled vehicles was born from Mesopotamian ingenuity. So in this race across water and land, we see a perfect study in adaptation. Egypt, blessed with a perfect river, became the supreme naval and riverine power, its society flowing along a single, majestic current. Mesopotamia, challenged by capricious rivers, used its commercial networks to unlock a new domain of movement, literally inventing the vehicle that would roll humanity toward a different future. One civilization turned its landscape into a highway, the other invented the machine that could conquer any landscape. The mastery of movement ultimately served a deeper ambition to shape the very substance of the world. The next frontier in our ancient showdown lies in the fire of the forge, where raw earth was transformed into tools of survival and objects of awe. This is the realm of metallurgy, where practical need and divine beauty clashed in the heat of the furnace. Mesopotamia's story with metal is one of gritty, essential innovation. Stuck on a river plain with no local metal ores, their survival depended on trading for copper and tin from distant mountains in Anatolia and beyond. This necessity bred a profound expertise. They did not just import finished goods, they mastered the complex, fiery science of smelting and alloying on an industrial scale. In vast workshop districts, artisans would heat raw copper ore in clay furnaces, using blowpipes or bellows to reach the scorching temperatures needed to separate the metal from the rocky waste. Their true genius emerged when they began mixing this copper with tin to create bronze, a harder, more durable alloy that revolutionized everything. Bronze plows turned the soil more deeply, bronze axes felled trees and shaped timber, and bronze weapons, from daggers to spear points, gave their armies a critical edge. This was metallurgy in service of empire and economy, a technology that amplified human strength and defined an age. Egypt, while certainly skilled in working copper and bronze, often took a different path. The Nile Valley had some copper mines in the Sinai, but for large-scale needs, they frequently imported raw copper ingots and bronze goods from the Levant and the Aegean. Their own smelting industries were less the driving force of their civilization. Yet, when it came to a different metal, they achieved a level of artistry that has never been surpassed. That metal was gold. Egypt was blessed with abundant gold in the desert mountains of Nubia, and they treated it not as a mere commodity but as the flesh of the gods. Their goldsmiths developed techniques of breathtaking sophistication. They mastered intricate soldering to join fine wires and sheets without melting the delicate pieces. They perfected the art of cloisonné, creating cells from thin gold strips and filling them with vibrant colored glass to create dazzling pectorals and masks. They could hammer gold into foil so thin it was translucent and cast solid gold statues with flawless precision. The treasures of Tutankhamun are not just piles of wealth, they are a technical manifesto, a display of alloying, inlaying, engraving, and sculpting in gold that represents the absolute pinnacle of ancient luxury metalwork. But one metal would change the rules for everyone: iron. Here, the innovation emerged squarely from the competitive, war-torn sphere of Mesopotamia. It was the Hittites, an empire based in Anatolia, who interacted deeply with Mesopotamian cultures, who pioneered the large-scale production of iron weapons around 1500 BC. They guarded the secret of achieving the high, sustained temperatures needed to smelt iron ore and carburize it into hard, usable steel. Iron was tougher and sharper than bronze, and its ores were far more common. When the Hittite Empire collapsed, the knowledge of ironworking spread like wildfire, a democratizing force in warfare and tools. Egypt, always a brilliant adapter, eventually embraced iron technology, but they were followers, not pioneers, in this revolutionary shift. So what does this fiery category reveal? Mesopotamia's metallurgical genius was foundational and utilitarian, born from scarcity and the relentless drive to improve tools and weapons for a competitive world. They worked the metals that built and armed civilizations. Egypt's supreme skill was transformative and artistic, taking a sacred material and elevating it into a language of divine power and eternal beauty. They worked the metal that adorned gods and kings. One civilization forged the backbone of progress, the other crafted its dazzling crown. That mastery of metal and movement was fueled by a more fundamental power, the ability to feed millions. A civilization's true strength is measured not in its monuments but in its harvest. The story of bread and water reveals how each culture wrestled with its greatest ally and its greatest enemy, the river itself. For Egypt, the Nile was a benevolent, rhythmic partner. Every summer, the river would swell with rains from far-off highlands, flooding its valley with a layer of rich black silt. This was the gift of the Nile, an annual act of natural fertilization that required no complex intervention. Egyptian farmers practiced a beautifully simple form of basin irrigation. They built low earthen walls to divide the floodplain into a series of large, shallow bowls. When the floodwaters came, they would open channels to let the water and its precious silt fill these basins, then close them off. The water would soak into the earth for weeks, depositing its nutrients before being drained back into the receding river. This left behind a perfectly watered, fertilized field ready for planting. The system was so efficient and the soil so rich that Egypt routinely produced enormous grain surpluses, particularly of emmer wheat and barley. These surpluses were the real foundation of the pyramids, feeding the vast labor force and allowing the state to stockpile for lean years. This agricultural predictability created the stability that defined Egyptian civilization for millennia. Food security was a given, a divine rhythm as reliable as the sun's journey across the sky. Now turn to the land between the Tigris and Euphrates. Here, the rivers were not gentle partners, they were volatile, demanding forces. Their floods were unpredictable, arriving in the spring from melting snows in the mountains, often at the wrong time for planting, and they could be catastrophically violent. To survive, Mesopotamian farmers had to become hydraulic engineers. They could not wait for a gift, they had to seize control. From a very early period, they began digging vast networks of irrigation canals, some stretching for dozens of miles, to divert water from the rivers to their fields throughout the growing season. They built complex systems of dikes and levees to hold back destructive floods and reservoirs to store water. This was large-scale, state-organized labor on a different kind of monument, a living, flowing one etched into the landscape. It was a stunning technological achievement that turned a challenging environment into the Fertile Crescent, but this victory came with a hidden, devastating cost. The constant irrigation in the hot, dry climate had a tragic side effect: salinization. As the canal water evaporated, it left behind salts that slowly poisoned the soil. Ancient clay tablets record the grim reality, lamenting that the earth turned white. Crop yields, particularly for sensitive wheat, began a long, slow decline over the centuries, forcing a shift to more salt-tolerant barley. This was an environmental time bomb built into their very success, a problem of their own brilliant making. So in this foundational category, we see a profound contrast. Egypt's agriculture was an elegant dance with a predictable partner, yielding bounty with relatively simple, sustainable techniques. Their advancement lay in brilliant adaptation to a perfect system. Mesopotamia's agriculture was a relentless war of conquest against a capricious force, yielding bounty through staggering feats of collective engineering, but ultimately sowing the seeds of its own ecological decline. Their advancement was a high-risk, high-reward gamble that demanded constant innovation just to maintain the status quo. One civilization thrived on the river's natural rhythm, the other rewrote the river's rules for better and for worse. The salt that poisoned Mesopotamian fields could not touch the knowledge stored in their libraries. For a civilization built on trade, law, and celestial calculation, preserving and passing on information was as vital as any harvest. This brings us to the minds behind the machine, the scribes, and the rigorous schools that forged them. In the shadow of a Mesopotamian ziggurat, you would find the Adaba, the tablet house. This was no casual classroom, it was a brutal boot camp for the intellect. A young student, usually from a wealthy family, would enter a life of intense discipline. His days were spent hunched over a lump of wet clay, a reed stylus in hand, painstakingly pressing wedge after wedge. The curriculum was punishingly standardized. First, he memorized hundreds of cuneiform signs, lists of words for trees, animals, cities, and gods. Then he moved to mathematics, copying and solving complex tables for multiplication, division, and calculating interest. Finally, he graduated to literature, copying out great works like the Epic of Gilgamesh or hymns to the gods. Mistakes were met with corporal punishment, as texts from the time cheerfully recount the rod striking the student's back. The goal was to produce a flawless, interchangeable bureaucrat, a human cog who could keep the accounts of the temple, draft a treaty for the king, or record a contract for a merchant. This system created something monumental, the world's first great libraries. The most famous belonged to Ashurbanipal, the last great king of Assyria, who amassed a collection of over 30,000 clay tablets in his palace at Nineveh. This was not a haphazard pile, it was an organized archive of the known world, containing everything from omens and medical texts to epic poetry and royal correspondence. The Mesopotamians did not just create knowledge, they systematically preserved it in a durable, searchable form, building a mountain of data for future generations. In Egypt, the path to becoming a scribe was equally elite and demanding, but it followed the current of the Nile. Training focused on the practical script of power, hieratic, the flowing cursive used for administration. A student scribe would learn by copying model letters, legal formulas, and religious texts onto flakes of limestone or potsherds, practicing with a brush and ink. The curriculum emphasized the skills needed to serve the state, calculating grain yields, managing labor crews, and composing official reports. Egyptian texts praised the scribe's life above all others. One famous piece advises, "Be a scribe, your body will be smooth, your hand will be soft. You will not be like a hired ox." The status was undeniably high, a direct pathway into the privileged bureaucracy, yet their knowledge preservation had a different character. While they produced magnificent papyrus scrolls, these organic materials are far more fragile than baked clay. Their great libraries, like the legendary institution attached to the Temple of Ammon, have largely turned to dust, leaving us with scattered fragments. So, which system cultivated a more advanced tradition of learning? Both created a powerful literate class essential to their civilization's function. But the Mesopotamian Adaba, with its standardized curriculum and its legacy of vast, durable clay tablet libraries, suggests a more formalized, extensive, and systematic approach to the preservation and transmission of knowledge. They built an empire not just of brick but of information, one carefully pressed wedge at a time. That mountain of clay tablets, that river of papyrus scrolls, all lead us to one final, overarching question. After the last empire fell and the last stone was cut, which of these two titans left a deeper mark on the world that followed? This is not just about who built higher, but whose ideas traveled farther through time. Egypt's legacy is a siren song of stone and spirit. Its smooth pyramids and serene, colossal statues became the ultimate archetype of ancient power and mystery for every culture that came after. When Greek travelers like Herodotus visited the Nile, they were awestruck, returning home with tales that filtered into their own art and thought. Later, Rome, in its hunger for grandeur, literally shipped Egyptian obelisks across the Mediterranean to adorn its circuses and forums, absorbing Egyptian gods like Isis into its own pantheon as popular mystery cults. For millennia, the very image of ancient has been an Egyptian image, a visual shorthand for eternity that has captivated artists, architects, and dreamers from Napoleon to modern filmmakers. Its monuments are a direct physical line to the past that anyone can see and feel. Mesopotamia's legacy, however, is woven into the invisible wiring of civilization itself. You cannot visit the Code of Hammurabi in a plaza, but you can find its echo in the law courts of today. Its principle of written public law resonates in the legal systems of the Hebrews, the Romans, and ultimately our own. Their cuneiform script, though it died out, represented the revolutionary idea of representing language with marks, a concept that evolved through Phoenician traders into the first true alphabet, the building blocks of Greek, Latin, and the words you are hearing right now. Their base 60 mathematics still ticks away in our clocks and charts our circles, while their systematic stargazing provided the raw data that Greek astronomers used to build models of the cosmos. Mesopotamia's gifts are the foundational code, the operating system upon which later cultures built their programs. So, who wins the final category? The answer is not one civilization over the other, but a recognition of their complementary immortality. Egypt bequeathed to the world an unforgettable iconography of the eternal, a visual and spiritual legacy that speaks directly to our awe. Mesopotamia furnished the intellectual toolkit for complex society itself, the legal, literary, and scientific frameworks that made sustained progress possible. One gave us the enduring symbols of human ambition, the other gave us the practical tools to organize that ambition on a grand scale. Their twin rivers of influence, one of stone and soul, the other of law and logic, have converged in the deep channels of our own history, forever shaping what we build, how we govern, and even how we tell time under the same stars they once watched. So after that deep dive, the moment of truth has arrived. We have explored 18 brutal categories, from the weight of stone to the flight of ideas. Now it is time to tally the score, to see which ancient superpower, Egypt or Mesopotamia, truly deserves the title of most advanced. Remember, this is based on the arguments we have built together, and you might score it differently. Let us go category by category. For architecture, Egypt's supernatural precision and logistical mastery with stone gives them a narrow edge over Mesopotamia's ingenious mud brick mountains. Point to Egypt. Writing and literacy goes to Mesopotamia for creating a system that empowered commerce, law, and literature for a broader segment of society. Point Mesopotamia. In mathematics, Mesopotamia's abstract theoretical framework and base 60 system that shaped our world outpaces Egypt's brilliant but purely practical engineering math. Another point for Mesopotamia. Astronomy is a close call, but Mesopotamia's systematic data collection and predictive models for eclipses and planetary motion just surpass Egypt's perfectly tuned but earth-bound solar calendar. Point Mesopotamia. For medicine, Egypt's clinical, observation-based approach with surgical manuals and anatomical knowledge clearly outshines Mesopotamia's more spiritually focused healing. Point Egypt. Law and justice sees Mesopotamia's revolutionary written, public code establishing a foundational concept of predictable justice, while Egypt relied on the fluid wisdom of the pharaoh. A clear point for Mesopotamia. Political structure is a tie. Egypt's divine, centralized stability allowed for monumental projects, while Mesopotamia's competitive city-states drove relentless innovation. We will call that a half point each. Military innovation goes to Mesopotamia for pioneering siege warfare, professional armies, and fundamentally, the wheeled chariot. Point Mesopotamia. In art, it is another tie. Egypt's eternal, orderly idealism and Mesopotamia's dynamic, narrative realism represent two pinnacles of human expression, impossible to rank. Half point each. Religion and cosmology is subjective, but for creating a complex, coherent system that integrated the individual, state, and cosmos, Egypt earns a point. Trade and economy goes to Mesopotamia for inventing the engine of market exchange with credit, contracts, and long-distance networks. Point Mesopotamia. Daily life and society is close, but Egypt's greater legal protections for women and more stable existence for the common farmer gives them a slight advantage. Point Egypt. Transportation splits. Egypt masters the river, Mesopotamia invents the wheel. Another tie, half point each. Metallurgy is also a split. Mesopotamia for foundational bronze and iron technology, Egypt for transcendent gold-working artistry. Half point each. Agriculture goes to Egypt for sustainable, predictable bounty versus Mesopotamia's brilliant but self-poisoning irrigation. Point Egypt. Education and libraries goes to Mesopotamia for their formalized scribble schools and vast, durable clay tablet archives. Point Mesopotamia. And finally, legacy and influence is a tie. Egypt's iconic imagery of eternity and Mesopotamia's invisible toolkit of law, writing, and math are equally indispensable. Half point each. Now let us add it up. Egypt's points total 7.5. Mesopotamia's points total 9.5. according to our scoring, Mesopotamia emerges with a narrow victory. But this is not the end of the story. Your score might be completely different. Did we weigh mathematics too heavily against medicine? Was the wheel more revolutionary than the perfect pyramid? The real answer lies in what you value most. Tell us in the comments how you scored it and who you believe was the true champion of the ancient world. That final tally tells only half the story. Our modern obsession with progress and innovation forces an ancient world into a box it never built. To declare a true winner, we must step back from the scorecard and ask a more profound question: what does advanced even mean? The pyramids and the law codes were not built to win a competition. They were solutions to entirely different problems. Egypt's genius was a genius of concentration. Every ounce of its societal energy, its mathematics, its engineering, its art, was channeled toward a single, magnificent goal: maintaining cosmic order. Their advancements were tools for achieving stability, for creating monuments that would defy time itself, and for ensuring the smooth journey of a divine king into eternity. This was a different kind of sophistication, one that valued perfection, permanence, and harmony above all else. A civilization that could plan for a century, that could align a monument to the stars with pinpoint accuracy, that could preserve a body for millennia, was operating on a timescale we can barely comprehend. Their power was the deep, slow power of a glacier, carving a single, perfect path through history. Mesopotamia's brilliance was a brilliance of diffusion. Stuck in a landscape of rival cities and capricious rivers, their innovations were born from immediate, gritty necessity. How do we trade without stone? Invent the contract. How do we defend our city, build a siege tower? How do we predict the gods' anger, map the stars? Their advancements were systemic solutions to complex urban problems: competition, scarcity, and social friction. This was a civilization built for adaptation, for argument, for quick response. Its power was the rapid, branching power of a river delta, constantly testing new channels in the search for the most efficient path. So the ultimate answer to our ancient showdown lies not in the data, but in your own values. Do you admire more the civilization that could marshal its entire soul to build a single, perfect thing meant to last forever? Or do you resonate more with the civilization that built the messy, interconnected machinery of modern society, with its laws, its markets, and its relentless, questioning spirit? One gave us the breathtaking idea of eternity carved in stone. The other gave us the restless engine of change written in clay. Perhaps the most advanced civilization is the one whose legacy you feel most deeply in the world around you and in the questions you now carry from this journey across the sands of time. The final score suggests a winner, but numbers can only measure what we choose to count. Mesopotamia's edge in our tally comes from a simple truth: their innovations built the framework for the world we recognize. Written law, market economics, abstract mathematics, systematic astronomy, these are the gears and pulleys of complex, interconnected societies. They solved problems of human interaction, of commerce and conflict, with a pragmatic, forward-thinking genius that feels remarkably modern. Their legacy is the invisible operating system of civilization itself. Yet to crown them and walk away would be to miss the profound, haunting beauty of Egypt's achievement. Theirs was a different kind of genius, one of transcendent focus. They took the concept of perfection and made it physical, aligning millions of tons of stone with the stars, preserving the human body across millennia, and weaving the individual, the state, and the cosmos into a single, seamless vision of eternal harmony. Their power was not in building systems for the messy present, but in crafting monuments for an infinite future. So if we define advancement as laying the foundational tools for societal complexity, Mesopotamia claims the title. But if we define it as achieving the absolute pinnacle of human ambition in art, engineering, and spiritual coherence, then Egypt stands alone. Perhaps the only honest verdict is not a victory, but a recognition of complementary majesty. One gave us the restless, inventive mind that asks how the world works. The other gave us the soaring spirit that asks how we might touch eternity. In the end, we are heirs to both, forever caught between the brilliant, practical clay of Mesopotamia and the sublime, eternal stone of Egypt. The echoes of their rivalries have faded into the sand and silt, leaving us not with a simple answer, but with a richer, more complex understanding of human potential. We have walked the straight processional avenues of Egypt and the winding streets of Ur, felt the chill of a surgical scalpel and the weight of a clay contract, traced the path of Sirius and calculated the fall of an eclipse. This was never about finding a loser, but about illuminating two distinct paths to greatness. Egypt perfected the art of eternity, focusing a civilization's soul into monuments of stone and a vision of cosmic harmony so potent it still captivates us. Mesopotamia mastered the engine of the present, building the legal, economic, and intellectual systems that allowed diverse, competitive cities to thrive and innovate. To compare them is to hold up two masterpieces, one a flawless diamond, the other a brilliantly complex clockwork. Both are priceless testaments to what we can achieve. In the end, the real victors of this ancient showdown are us. We are the inheritors of this combined legacy, living in a world shaped by Mesopotamian law and mathematics, yet forever dreaming in the shadow of Egyptian pyramids. Our time is measured in their base 60 minutes, our stories are built on their alphabets, and our deepest symbols of power and mystery are carved in their image. So now the final judgment passes to you. Cast your vote in the comments below, ancient Egypt or Mesopotamia, and tell us which argument changed your perspective. For more journeys into the heart of history's greatest mysteries, make sure to subscribe. As the sun sets, it casts one last, long shadow that stretches from the stepped silhouette of a ziggurat to the smooth, sloping face of a pyramid, a single, magnificent horizon forged by two worlds.